The ping of an incoming message lit up the cracked screen of an old phone, resting between the trembling hands of a struggling single mother. Angela Monroe sat perched on the edge of her worn-out sofa, clutching to the last shred of hope she had left. A single text message sent to her ex, begging for $60 to buy formula for her autistic son, Jackson. But the message didn't reach Jason. Instead, it went somewhere she never could have imagined, into the hands of Sylvester Stallone. What followed was more than just a mistaken message. It became an inspirational story of unexpected kindness, quiet courage, and a second chance that changed everything. In a small, drafty apartment in Dayton, Ohio, with only $5.18 in her account, Angela had nothing left. The formula Jackson needed, EllaCare Jr., was far beyond her means. Not just any baby formula. It was a specialized blend for children with digestive and sensory sensitivities. And it wasn't covered by aid programs fast enough. She had watered down Jackson's last 2 bottles with almond milk and water, already pushing past safe limits. The electricity bill had been paid only after she pawned her wristwatch the week before. Every food pantry in the area was out of supplies, and the WIC renewal hadn't come through. She was out of options. Jason had promised to help when they broke up last year, but his help came in short bursts. A box of diapers here, $20 there, always with an excuse. Lately, it had just been silence. Still, desperate, Angela sent the message. He hadn't blocked her. That had to mean something. She waited. Nothing. Then her phone buzzed. "I think you've got the wrong number. I'm not Jason." Angela froze. Horror set in. She checked her message. 1 digit off. Her stomach dropped. "I'm so sorry," she typed quickly. "Wrong number. Please ignore." She dropped the phone to her side, burning with embarrassment. Another failure in a week filled with them. She closed her eyes, fighting the tears. But then another message came through. "Is your son going to be okay?" Angela frowned. Why would a stranger care? "We'll manage," she typed, her tone clipped. "Sorry to bother you." She didn't expect anything else, but he replied, "I can help. No strings attached." Angela scoffed. There were always strings. "Thanks, but I don't take money from strangers." "Smart policy," came the answer. A pause, then, "I'm Sly. Now I'm not a stranger." Angela blinked. Sly? What kind of name was that? Still, the tone was calm. Not pushy. Just present. Another message followed. "What kind of formula does your son need?" Her fingers hovered. She should block him. She didn't know him. But she also didn't know how she'd get through the next 48 hours. "EllaCare Jr.," she finally typed. "He has sensory and dietary issues. It's the only kind he'll drink." "What's your Venmo?" Angela hesitated. Everything inside her screamed, "Don't." But then she heard Jackson shifting through the monitor, humming softly to himself, repeating that one line from Finding Nemo he always used to self-soothe. "Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming." She sent it. 30 seconds later, her phone buzzed again. $600. Her breath caught. "No, no, no!" she typed in a panic. "That's too much. I only needed 60. Buy enough for the month," came the reply. "And maybe a warm blanket. I hear it's cold in Ohio." Angela stared at the screen, stunned. She hadn't mentioned where she lived. Her heart pounded until the next message came. "Relax. Your Venmo handle says Angela Dayton Mom." I guessed. She exhaled shakily. For the first time in weeks, something loosened in her chest. Relief. She pressed the phone to her heart, blinking back the tears. She hadn't cried when Jason left, or when the final notice slid under her door. Not even when she had to put groceries back at the Kroger checkout, pretending she forgot her card. But now, over a stranger's generosity, she broke. "Thank you," she wrote. "You have no idea what this means." "Take care of Jackson," Sly replied. That night, Angela made a warm bottle of formula and sat beside her son as he rocked gently on the carpet, sipping while humming that familiar tune. She reached out and pushed his soft curls back from his forehead. "We're going to be okay, baby," she whispered, not sure if she believed it yet, but needing to say it aloud. It wasn't until she stood at the sink washing dishes that it hit her. She'd never mentioned Jackson's name. The next morning, golden light streamed through the frosted kitchen window. Her phone buzzed again. "Hope Jackson had a better night. I have a proposition for you." Angela's stomach clenched. There it was, the catch. "What kind of proposition?" she typed, steeling herself. "Professional, not personal," came the response. "I help manage a foundation for families with children with disabilities. We need someone with admin experience for a short-term project. It's remote and flexible. I saw your old resume listed medical office assistant. Still accurate?" Angela blinked. Her resume hadn't been updated in years. "How do you know about that?" "I looked up your number. Had to make sure this wasn't a scam. Found your resume on an old nonprofit job board. Sorry if that's invasive." She sat there, torn. On one hand, it was a breach. But he hadn't lied, hadn't asked for anything. He'd helped. "It's a 3-month contract," he continued. $1,500 per week. Data entry, scheduling, donor coordination, and if it works out, we'll talk more. Angela stared at the screen, stunned. It was more than she made in 2 months at her last job. "This is real?" "Come to New York," came the reply. "We'll cover travel. Bring Jackson. We've got a sensory-friendly suite at our building. See for yourself." Angela looked over at Jackson, now lining up crayons by shade across the living room carpet, humming softly. 1 week ago, she hadn't known how she would feed him. Now, a stranger, Sylvester Stallone, was offering her a job. And she hadn't even asked. Angela didn't sleep much that night. Her thoughts swirled with possibility and suspicion, gratitude and fear. She kept replaying the text exchange with Sly, wondering what kind of person offered that much money to a stranger with no expectations. The offer of a job complicated it further. Too good to be real, too specific to be fake. She did the only thing she could think of and Googled Sly and Foundation for Families with Disabilities. And there it was, the Stallone Family Foundation, headquartered in Manhattan, New York. Its mission statement, supporting resilience, dignity, and progress for families raising children with special needs. The board chair, Sylvester Stallone. Her breath caught. She clicked to the foundation's homepage and saw a short video of Stallone himself, older but unmistakable, speaking directly to the camera. "I know what it's like to feel helpless," he said, his voice weathered, familiar, strong. "When my son, Sergio, was diagnosed with autism in the early 80s, the world didn't know what that meant. We had no roadmap, but every parent deserves support. That's why we're here." Angela leaned back in her chair, stunned. She hadn't recognized the name at first. Sly. Of course, Sylvester Stallone. She remembered watching Rocky with her dad, his voice raspy as he mimicked Stallone's lines, always cheering for the underdog. She picked up her phone, her fingers shaking. "I saw the foundation video. I didn't realize who you were. Why me?" The reply came fast. Because I remember what it felt like to be broke, scared, and responsible for someone who didn't ask to be brought into the struggle. You were honest, and brave enough to ask for help. That's rare. Angela didn't know what to say. In her world, help was usually conditional. But this felt different. She typed, "Okay, what do I need to do?" The next morning, she and Jackson boarded a plane for New York City. The foundation had arranged everything: flights, a car service, and even a social worker to meet them at JFK. The woman, a calm, smiling brunette named Nora, greeted them with a handwritten sign that read, "Angela and Jackson," and a small stuffed tiger that Jackson immediately clutched without being prompted. The drive through the city was surreal. Jackson sat silently, his eyes wide as they crossed the Queensboro Bridge, his fingers tracing the raindrops on the window. Nora explained the foundation's work, how they funded therapy scholarships, developed parent education programs, and had just launched a remote employment initiative for single caregivers with professional backgrounds. Angela listened, half in awe, half in disbelief. She had gone from counting quarters to buy bread at the corner store, to riding in a Lincoln Town car, across Manhattan with a stranger who somehow felt more familiar than most people back home. They arrived at a tall brick building in the Flatiron District. Inside, the foundation office wasn't sterile or corporate. It was warm. Children's art covered the walls, and the receptionist greeted them like family. Nora led Angela through a series of warmly lit rooms, past a playroom outfitted with sensory tools, soft lights, weighted blankets, noise-canceling headphones, until they reached a glass-walled conference room where a man stood waiting. He wore dark jeans, a gray Henley, and a leather jacket that somehow looked timeless. His hair was silver now, eyes steady and kind. It took Angela a full moment to accept that yes, this was Sylvester Stallone. Not on a screen, not a fantasy. Right there in front of her. "Angela," he said, stepping forward and offering his hand. "Thanks for coming. And this must be Jackson." Jackson didn't respond, but he gave the tiniest nod, his grip still tight around the tiger. "It's good to meet you," Stallone said, crouching slightly, not too close, not trying too hard. "I've heard a lot about you, little man." Angela's voice caught. "Thank you for everything," she managed, still overwhelmed. "We're just getting started," he said, motioning for her to sit. They spent the next hour reviewing the job offer. It was real. Angela would work remotely as a program assistant, helping schedule meetings, track grant reports, and assist with the upcoming donor drive. The foundation would provide a laptop, training, and pay weekly. "We want our people focused on the mission, not the rent," Stallone said simply. Jackson was welcome to attend play sessions at the Sensory Center while she trained on site for the first 2 weeks. "The truth is," Stallone continued, "we've got experts who know systems and numbers. What we don't have are people who know the grind, who understand what it's like to juggle work and parenting and survival. That perspective is worth more than you think." Angela felt a slow warmth rising through her chest. She wasn't being offered charity. She was being offered trust. That night, settled into a modest but comfortable guest apartment provided by the foundation just a few blocks away, Angela tucked Jackson into a real bed with soft linens and blackout curtains. He drifted to sleep faster than usual, soothed by the quiet and the routine Nora had helped her establish. Angela sat at the tiny kitchen table, her fingers brushing over the contract folder. She couldn't stop thinking about how fast things had changed. 2 days ago, she had no formula. Now she had a future. She scrolled through the messages still open on her phone. One stood out. "We rise when we lift others," it read. She typed back, "You have no idea how much this means." The response came a minute later. "Maybe I do." The next morning, training began. Angela dove in with focus and eagerness, surprising even herself with how quickly she remembered her skills. Organization had always been her strength, before motherhood pushed it aside for survival. She filed reports, updated databases, drafted outreach emails with a clarity that impressed Nora and the program director. Meanwhile, Jackson adjusted better than she ever dreamed. The playroom therapist, a patient man named Devon, who had a nephew on the spectrum, worked gently with Jackson, encouraging his love of patterns and allowing space for silence. Within 3 days, Jackson had begun verbal scripting less and making more eye contact. Angela found herself watching him through the playroom glass wall between tasks, her eyes wet with a mix of pride and disbelief. At the end of the first week, Stallone stopped by her desk. "You're fitting in like a champ," he said, smiling. "I'm glad we met." Angela hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at her since day one. "Why did you really help me, Mr. Stallone?" He leaned against the edge of the desk, folding his arms. "Because one time, when I was 23, I had $11 to my name and a baby on the way. I sold my dog for food, took the bus to every casting office in the city. Nobody saw me as worth anything." His voice dipped low. "When I finally got a break, I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd be the guy who gave someone else their first shot. That was you." Angela couldn't speak. Her throat closed with emotion. "And call me Sly," he added, his smile soft. "Mr. Stallone makes me sound old." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Not because anything was perfect, but because for the first time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. 3 weeks into her new job, Angela had slipped into a rhythm she hadn't thought possible since Jackson's diagnosis. Each morning, she packed their routine into the space between sunrise and the smell of brewed coffee in the Foundation's small staff kitchen. Jackson now looked forward to his sessions with Devon, sometimes walking ahead of her, with confidence that felt like a small miracle. Angela, meanwhile, found a piece of herself returning that had been buried under years of fatigue and survival. The part of her that once dreamt of stability, of having a career and purpose. Her work had expanded quickly. What began as a temporary contract to help with administrative support had evolved into leading the logistics for the upcoming Spring Gala, a major donor event that would help fund the Foundation's programs for the next year. Nora and the board trusted her. Stallone often stopped by her desk, not to monitor, but to check in, always with the same quiet respect that made it easy to forget his fame. It was only when someone else in the office whispered, "Did you see who just walked by?" that Angela remembered she worked for a man who had been on the world stage for decades, and yet he never acted like it. He treated the janitor and the donor the same. That left an impression. One afternoon, after finishing a long video call with a logistics vendor, Angela noticed Stallone lingering in the hallway, hesitating near her door. "Got a minute?" he asked, his tone casual, but carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "Sure," she said, setting her notebook aside. He stepped into the office, looking slightly tired, the lines in his face more pronounced than usual. "I wanted to tell you something, before you hear it from someone else." A reporter reached out. Somehow got wind of your story, about the wrong number, the donation, the job offer. They want to write about it. They think it's heartwarming. I've asked them to respect your privacy. It's your call. Angela felt the blood rise to her face. Her instinct was to say no. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to be a headline. But as she thought about it more, something shifted. What if someone else, some mother just as scared and alone as she had been, saw that story and felt less ashamed to ask for help? What if her embarrassment could become someone else's lifeline? I'll do it, she said slowly, but only if they tell the story right. Not just about me getting help, but about how that help led to work, to worth, and how Jackson, how kids like him, deserve a world that meets them where they are. Stallone's eyes lit with something close to pride. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. The article was published 2 weeks later in the New York Times. Wrong number, right chance. How a struggling mother's text to a Hollywood icon changed her life. The photo featured Angela and Jackson standing in front of the foundation building, her hand on his shoulder, his small face turned toward hers, both of them in the soft spring light. The story spread fast, more than anyone expected. Donations to the foundation surged. The gala, once predicted to raise $500,000, soared past $1 million in pledged gifts. Angela received messages from mothers across the country, strangers who had read her story and saw themselves in it, women navigating systems with no safety net, holding jobs and children and anxiety all at once. Angela responded to each one, sometimes with just a line or two, but always with honesty. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible. She refused to let others feel the same. One morning, after another successful donor meeting, Stallone called her into his office. His assistant wasn't at her desk, and the door was open. Inside, he gestured for her to sit. "I want to offer you something more permanent," he said. "Director of Family Outreach. It's yours if you want it. You'd help us build the programs we're dreaming about. Job training for parents, autism education in rural schools, remote caregiver support networks. Your story is more than a story, Angela. It's a strategy." She stared at him, stunned. I never saw myself as someone who deserved to lead," he interrupted gently. "Angela, leaders aren't born in perfect conditions. They're forged in pressure. You've got the fire. We just gave you room to breathe." She accepted. The new position came with a salary that would cover more than rent and groceries. It meant savings, vacations maybe, a used car even. She moved out of the foundation's guest apartment and into a modest 2-bedroom in Astoria, with a little park nearby that Jackson loved. On weekends, they walked the East River, watching tugboats move across the current, his hand always resting gently in hers. One Sunday morning, Jackson reached up and touched her face, unprompted, and said softly, "Mama happy now?" Angela cried on the spot. 6 months passed, then a year. Angela's role at the foundation grew beyond anyone's expectations. She spoke at conferences, consulted on inclusive hiring practices, and led workshops for nonprofits across the country. Jackson was thriving. He'd started using a speech device at his therapy center, and now loved pressing the button that said, "Hug Mama," whenever she picked him up. On the anniversary of the text, Stallone invited her to lunch at a quiet restaurant on the Upper West Side. Over coffee and grilled chicken salads, he handed her a small envelope. "Open it," he said, smiling. Inside was a card with one line. "Sometimes the best stories begin by mistake." "It's from my wife," he added. "She said to tell you that you're one of the best things to come out of a wrong number." Angela laughed, shaking her head. "Well, tell her I said thanks, and that I still can't believe any of this is real." "That's the funny thing," Stallone replied. "It's the most real thing I've been part of in a long time." That evening, as she and Jackson sat on their fire escape, watching the sun dip behind the city skyline, Angela whispered softly to her son, "You changed everything, you know that?" He looked up, pressed a hand to her cheek, then nestled against her shoulder. The moment was quiet, still, and so full of peace it almost hurt. Angela thought about that first message, about the humiliation, the fear, the kindness, the choice. And then she thought of the hundreds of people now being helped, the mothers finding dignity, the children like Jackson finding safety. One accidental text had started it all, not because it was lucky, but because someone on the other end answered with grace. She closed her eyes, breathed in the warm New York air, and held her son closer, knowing that, for the first time in a long time, they weren't surviving anymore. They were living together.